In this video, I'm going to teach you how to make the exact same sugar cookie icing I use on my sugar cookies and walk you through how I decorate them. This video focuses only on making and working with sugar cookie icing and very basic beginner decorating tips. If you're interested in the actual sugar cookie recipe, I will put a link down below in the description box. To get started, we're going to need 4 cups of powdered sugar. When I measure my powdered sugar, I scoop and level off rather than spoon it into my measuring cup. This is the brand of meringue powder I use. I get mine at Walmart in the cake decorating aisle, not the baking aisle. We're going to need 6 tablespoons of meringue powder. Add in 8 tablespoons of water. This is not the final amount of water we'll be using, so keep this close by. We're going to mix this until all of the powdered sugar has been completely mixed in. Then we're going to add in 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Turn your mixer on again and mix for about 2 to 3 minutes. Next, we're going to measure out the icing. I normally never measure because each time I go to decorate a set of cookies, the amount of colors I want to use varies each time, and the type of consistencies I want also vary for each cookie project. But today I'm going to measure out each color so that your icing consistencies will come out exactly like mine. Our 2 main colors are going to be blue and yellow with white, black, and orange as accent colors. We're going to start off with the orange. We don't need a lot of icing for the orange, just enough for the beaks and feet for each chick. We're looking at about 38 grams of icing. This is more than enough. Okay, we're going to set this to the side. Our next color is going to be blue. We need enough icing to make both the piping and flood consistency. It looks like we're going to go with 172 grams for the blue icing. For our last main color, we're going to use a little bit more icing since I think there's more chicks than bunnies, which means we're going to need more yellow. Looks like this one is 296 grams. Here are the main colors: orange, yellow, and blue. We're going to start off mixing the orange. I like to use the brand Americolor. It's a gel food coloring. The colors are very bright and it doesn't take much to get the desired colors I'm going for. For the orange, we're going to add in 1/4 of a teaspoon of water. Give your icing a thorough mix and it's ready to go. When I decorate my cookies, I like to use a piping bag with a number 2 piping tip. For the blue, we're going to need 2 consistencies, one for piping and one for flooding. We're going to start with the piping consistency because it needs to be thicker than the flood. In total, we're going to use 1 teaspoon of water. You can see here I started with 1/2 teaspoon, mixed it in, then added in another 1/2 teaspoon. Okay, this looks good. Off camera, I scooped out a little less than half of the blue icing into a piping bag and made sure to leave enough blue icing behind to make the flood consistency. The weight of what's left in the bowl doesn't matter at this point. We're going to start by adding in 1/2 teaspoon of water and see what that makes. We're looking for a shampoo-like consistency. I did end up adding a hair more water. Not a full teaspoon, just like 1/4 of a teaspoon. This is perfect. Our last color is yellow. We need a piping and flood consistency for this one too. There's a lot of icing in this bowl, so I'm going to start off with 1 teaspoon of water. I'm using a 1/2 teaspoon measure here. I know it looks like I just added in 2 teaspoons of water, but I promise it was only a 1/2 teaspoon each time. After giving a quick mix, I decided it needed a bit more water, so in total for a piping consistency, I added in 1.5 teaspoons of water for the yellow icing. Same thing as before, scoop out some icing into a piping bag. I always end up scooping out more than I really need. You want to make sure that you have more flood icing than piping. To make the flood icing, again, we're looking for a shampoo-like consistency. I'm going to start off by adding in a full teaspoon of water. This is pretty close, so I'm only going to add in a few drops more of water. Not a lot. Okay, this looks good. Now we're ready. I've already baked my cookies. We're going with bunnies and circles, which we're going to turn into these funny looking chicks. I figured we'd start with a very easy cookie. the circle, and work up to the bunny. The one and only tool I use for moving my flood icing around on the cookie are these toothpicks. Here are all my piping icings. I'm using a number 2 tip for all of them except the white and black. I'll explain why later. I like to keep them tipped down on a very lightly damp paper towel. This helps keep them from drying out while I'm working with the different colors. Here are my flood icings. As you can see, I have more yellow than blue. Reason being, I originally planned on having only yellow chicks and blue bunnies, and since I have more chicks than bunnies, I needed more yellow than blue. Obviously, that plan changed and I ended up with a mix of everything. For our first cookie, we're going to start off with this simple circle. Start with a gentle squeeze. You want even pressure while you're piping along the edges of your cookie. It helps to stabilize your arms while you're piping. I like to rest my forearms on the edge of the table, and with the hand that isn't holding the piping bag, I like to rest it on my wrist. This just helps keep my piping hand from shaking all over the place. Some people place their supporting hand or finger directly on their piping bag. I've done it both ways. I've even rested my elbows on my legs. Just test it out. Everyone is different, and finding that comfortable position is key. Once you've piped your line, grab your flood icing and squeeze along the outline, working your way inward. Next, use a toothpick to move the icing around towards the edges or anywhere that needs more icing. There are 2 motions I like to use when using a toothpick. A sweeping straight line motion helps drag your icing to an area you want to fill, or a swirling motion is used to bring the icing to the edges. Sometimes you'll notice little air bubbles trying to break the surface. Just grab a toothpick and give them a little pop. And since we want to add bulging eyeballs, beaks, and feet, we're going to set this to the side to dry. If we add them now, it's just going to sink into the yellow and not be as cute. Let's make a blue chick. Getting a clogged or dried up tip is bound to happen at some point. A toothpick will help break that up. Again, go with a slow and even pressure. Pipe your outline on your cookie and follow it up with your flood icing. Grab a toothpick and swirl it around in your icing, dragging it to the areas you're trying to fill. Yes, I can feel and hear my toothpick lightly scratching on the surface of my cookie as I'm moving the icing around. Nope, I've never had a problem with cookie crumbs getting into my icing. Not once. Okay, we're a few cookies in and it's been at least an hour or so since our first cookie, and it looks like it's set enough that we can start piping on top. The reason I'm not using a piping tip for the white is because my other tips were in the dishwasher. For this icing, I only added in a drop or 2 of water. It was pretty much already at the right consistency. I just wanted it to be a little bit more smooth. We want it thick enough to hold a round eyeball shape. Pipe a small amount of frosting for each eyeball and take your toothpick and gently swirl it around. The bigger the swirling motion you make, the bigger the eyeball will get. Since the icing is a little stiffer, it helps to lift your cookie up and drop it back down on the table a few times. This helps smooth the icing out a bit. Now, you can either set this to the side to fully dry before adding on the beak, or you can add on the beak now. Keep in mind, if you add it on now, they will both sort of bleed together. Pipe your feet out and set your little bird to the side to dry. Okay, we're gonna pipe on the eyeballs again, except this time we're gonna let them completely dry before we add on the feet and the beak. For the black icing, I did not add in any additional water. I'm using a number 3 piping tip, which I do not recommend. I'm barely squeezing. I want a very tiny dot. The smaller the dot, the more hysterical my chick will look. If this makes you way too nervous, grab a toothpick and dip it into your icing tip and apply your dot that way. This was actually way easier and far less stressful. And since our eyes are dry, when you apply the beak, the colors won't merge like before. Now that we've learned how to make the chicks, let me show you 2 decorating tips. For the first one, we're going to start off with a freshly iced cookie. Take your blue flood icing and squeeze on some dots. Since we're using the flood icing, both colors will merge into one layer and dry flat. To jazz up your cookie, we're going to add in a few of these colored sprinkles. I picked this up from Hobby Lobby in their seasonal area. Doesn't this look pretty? Almost like a weirdly shaped Easter egg. For the second decorating tip, take a dried cookie, grab your flood icing, and do the same thing as before. Squeeze out some dots, and since the yellow is dry, the blue will dry on the surface of that. This is great for making spots on dinosaur cookies or anything that could use a textured spot. Here's some examples of cookies I've made with dots. Okay, I think we're ready to move on to bunnies. Same thing as before, but just with a bit more wrist action since this bunny has some curves. Give your icing a gentle, even squeeze and drag your icing around the edges. You've probably noticed this now, but I like to lift my icing while I pipe it. This helps me lay a smoother, less shaky line, plus it allows me to see where I'm going and which direction I want the icing to fall. If I pull up too high, the line will break, so try not to go too high yourself. We're going to do the same thing with the flood icing. We're going to start by running a line along the edges and filling in the middle. Same strategy as before. Use a swirling motion or a sweeping motion to help move that icing into the places you want it to fill. If you need more flood icing, go ahead and add more. Just be careful not to add in too much. You don't want it spilling over the edges. Check your bunny for any air bubbles and pop any that you see. To decorate the bunnies, we're just going to use the same sprinkles as before. Doesn't he look cute? All festive, and yet he was very simple to put together. Keep in mind, I am not a professional baker or cookie decorator. My skills are very basic, and like with everything else, will only get better with practice. If you're struggling with your icing, just remember it does take time and patience. Also, if you're curious, I do not have black food coloring. I had to make my own using a drop of red, green, and blue. That makes black. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I will try to answer each as best I can. If you're interested in the cookie recipe, I will put a link down in the description box below. The piping bags, couplers, tips, sprinkles were all purchased from Hobby Lobby. The squeeze bottles I picked up from Walmart, and the gel food coloring, the AmeriColor brand, was purchased from Amazon. If you want to make this icing exactly like this video, I will insert a measurements list right here. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, I hope you give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out, and I'll see you all in the next video.